All right, let's dive right in. We're going to deconstruct what is, frankly, one of the most important documents for financial firms this year, FINRA's 2025 Annual Regulatory Oversight Report. You really need to think of this as a critical guide for navigating the evolving landscape of financial risks. So, let's break down its key findings and what they mean for you.
This report isn't just a look back at what happened last year. It's really a strategic guide. FINRA is essentially laying out a roadmap for all member firms to navigate what's become an incredibly complex and super fast-moving, tech-driven threat environment. It's absolutely an essential tool for understanding the challenges that are coming our way.
So here's how we'll tackle this. First, we'll set the scene with the report itself. Then, we'll jump into what I'm calling the new digital battlefield of financial crime. After that, we'll look at fortifying your own firm's operations and, of course, protecting investors directly. And we'll wrap it all up with a clear, actionable compliance plan.
Okay, so what is this report really all about? Let's start with its fundamental purpose and how it's all put together. The big idea here is transparency, plain and simple. FINRA uses this report to give you a direct look into what their examiners and their surveillance programs are actually seeing out there in the real world. It's a huge help, letting you benchmark your own compliance programs against what's happening across the entire industry.
Now, for 2025, FINRA has added several new sections that really signal where their focus is shifting. The fact that they've added third-party risk, RELAs, and extended hours trading tells you these are becoming major points of interest. And we're also seeing some really significant new material on AI, remote inspections, and fractional shares. These are for sure the key areas of concern for the year ahead. And that brings us to our first major theme, this escalating digital war against financial crime. And this is where we're seeing some of the most urgent and, honestly, the most rapidly evolving threats today. This quote from the report, it just captures the current threat landscape perfectly. The key words to focus on here are variety, frequency, and sophistication. The attacks aren't just more common. They're way smarter, they're more complex, and frankly, more dangerous than ever before. This is the new reality every single firm has to be ready for.
So, what are we up against? Well, you can see the wide range of threats right here. You've got your usual suspects, ransomware, account takeovers, you know the drill. But FINRA is also flagging some newer methods, and you've got to pay special attention to this one, quishing. Yeah, that's phishing attacks using QR codes. It sounds a little goofy, but it's a simple and surprisingly effective new weapon for attackers.
Here is a term you absolutely need to know, quasi-APTs. For years, we've always associated these super sophisticated long-term intrusions with state-sponsored hackers. Well, that's not the case anymore. Well-resourced criminal groups now have those same capabilities, which makes these advanced threats so much more widespread.
And this leads us to probably the biggest technological game changer right now, generative AI. It's not just a cool tool for productivity, it is rapidly becoming a weapon for criminals. So the question is, how exactly are they using it? Well, the ways criminals are using Gen AI is pretty concerning. We're talking creating incredibly convincing deepfake videos and audio for impersonation scams. It can generate what's called polymorphic malware. That's code that constantly rewrites itself to get past your antivirus software. It can also create synthetic IDs for new account fraud and write phishing emails that are almost impossible to tell from the real thing.
Another big area of focus is ACH fraud, which the report points out is definitely on the rise. It's really important to know the difference between the two main types. First party is when a customer is trying to game the system themselves. But third party, that's much more sinister. That's when a criminal uses stolen info to take over an account and just drain the funds.
So, how do you fight back? Well, FINRA highlights several effective practices. First and foremost, regular, practical staff training isn't just a good idea, it's non-negotiable. Your people are your first line of defense. Second, strong identity verification is like the lock on your front door. Make it as secure as you possibly can. And finally, network segmentation is absolutely crucial. It basically prevents an attacker who gets into one part of your system from getting the keys to the whole kingdom.
All right, our next section shifts focus a bit, moving from those external attacks to your internal and operational integrity. And we're starting with a major new topic for 2025. This is a big one. Your firm's security is no longer just about what's inside your own four walls. We rely so much on outside vendors for critical functions, which means a vulnerability in their system is a vulnerability in your system. FINRA is putting a huge new emphasis on this interconnected risk.
And this is where FINRA is seeing a lot of firms drop the ball. They're seeing a lack of good due diligence, not just when you first sign a contract, but on an ongoing basis. Firms are also failing to validate security controls in those contracts, and a big one, they're forgetting about what happens to their data when a contract ends. But here's the kicker: fourth-party risk. That's right, you have to worry about the vendors that your vendors are using.
So the best practices here are really all about lifecycle management. You need a detailed inventory of every single vendor. You need to be asking them specifically about their use of generative AI and writing rules into your contracts to protect your data. And you have to have a rock-solid offboarding process to make sure access is cut off the second a relationship ends.
Okay, now let's pivot to the firm's direct duty to protect its clients. Because bad actors aren't just targeting firms anymore, they are going straight to the investors themselves.
These scams have gotten so personal and so targeted. We're seeing fake investment clubs on encrypted apps like Telegram, elaborate relationship scams that build trust over months just to defraud a victim, and even tech support scams where criminals pretend to be from your firm's own help desk.
So how can your firm actually intervene? Well, it starts with education, training your staff to spot the red flags that could signal a client is being exploited. You have to monitor for unusual behavior, like sudden big withdrawals that are out of character. And you've got to know your tools. Rule 2165 lets you place temporary holds on fishy disbursements, and trusted contact persons can be an essential lifeline.
FINRA is also shining a spotlight on an evolution in market manipulation. You know, the classic pump and dump scheme used to happen right at the IPO. But now, these manipulators are being more patient. They're orchestrating these schemes weeks or even months later, which, of course, makes them much harder for you to detect.
Okay, so we've covered the threats, we've covered the findings. Let's wrap all this up by turning this insight into a clear, forward-looking action plan for your compliance program.
Here are 5 critical steps you can take right now. 1. Perform formal, written risk assessments for both AML and cybersecurity. 2. Get really serious about your third-party vendor management. 3. Make sure your surveillance is actually tailored to these new manipulation tactics. 4. Update your training to include Gen AI threats and those direct-to-investor scams. And finally, 5. Review your communications to make sure they're fair, balanced, and totally clear about risk. And this really brings us to the central message of the entire 2025 report. You have to be proactive, not reactive. As these threats evolve at a pace we've never seen before, the question I want to leave you with is this: is your compliance program built for the risks of yesterday, or is it truly ready for the challenges of tomorrow?